There were so many things people wanted to happen in 2020 that didn't happen. I love Tokyo. I had friends there. I had a life there. I could already see what my future was going to look like. But I had to change my thinking because I couldn't come back. But what I did know is that I had to pivot myself and my own thinking to be like, well, now we're in London. What are we going to do? What's the next step? We need to move on. And so, that's really effectively what I had to do.
Welcome to another edition of Two Lit Chicks. It is Fern Johnson here. I am happy to be in the limelight, in the spotlight with someone who has become near and dear to me. And she's the other Two Lit Chick for this episode. And her name is Tariro Mupamhadz. Tariro, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here and I'm really excited for this conversation. So, yeah, thanks.
Let's jump right in it. So,
Lovely.
have you ever thought about what it would take to drive your career in different areas? Have you ever thought about how do you move from running from something to moving towards something? But that's a part of today's conversation in all about career pivot points. And when I first met you, which was about 6 to 8 months ago, you were interested in how do I make career pivots for myself, for yourself?
Yeah.
How do you navigate those waters? And you were seeking counsel from an old soul like me.
She's young.
And we have affectionately establishing a mentored relationship.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about a little bit how we met. So let's go back and roll the tape. Fern was out at Black Tech Fest 2024 in October in London. And just got off the stage, and in comes running Tariro and her coworker, who were very anxious to speak with me and to learn more about my background. And Tariro was just very, very passionate. She was very poised, and she was just like, I haven't seen someone who looks like you. I've never met an executive at your level who kept it real. And I said, well, my gosh, let's talk. And we continued to talk. And she said, hey, would you be interested in mentoring me? And I said, absolutely. You're exactly the population I'm trying to reach to help you accelerate your greatness in tech as soon as possible. And so we have now had a mentoring relationship for the past 4 months or so. And it's been great to learn about you and see you blossom and take some great feedback and put it into action. And I'm learning some UK isms and some good terms that I can apply. So for me, mentoring is always a two-way relationship. So let me pause and welcome in Miss Tariro. She's a phenomenal young leader in tech. She's a UX researcher and designer at a company called Charlotte Tilbury in London. You're in the makeup industry.
Absolutely.
Which is a consumer products and good industry. But talk to us about what you do at Charlotte Tilbury and your role as this really dynamic UX designer.
Yes. And that's a really great introduction, Fern. So thank you for that. And so as a UX researcher, my job is to basically be the voice of the customer. I usually speak to them every other week, honestly, whether that's a survey, whether that's interviews or focus groups. And what's really awesome about this job is it's at the intersection of both product and business needs as well. So it's not just looking at one or the other and thinking maybe one side is correct and the other one is obsolete. It's about balancing the two. So looking at how we can improve the product because, like you said, it's a consumer facing business. So we really have to make sure that the consumer loves what we're basically producing, but at the same time, really balancing that out with what the business actually wants to achieve in that quarter, that 3-month period, that year, whatever that looks like. But I would say it's an amazing, amazing position because again, it's looking at the psychology of users, why they do the things that they do, but also intersecting it with design decisions and making those decisions more informed rather than just hopeful and lucky. And I love doing it in a makeup company because I don't think yet, people realize how much tech is in makeup or at least makeup brands. And so it's really exciting for me to be in this industry at this time, especially, with the uptick of things like AI and how we incorporate that into the consumer journey and how people feel about that as well, especially in different countries, different regions. But yeah, it's an amazing role been in it for a couple of years now, and so I love it.
Let me ask you this question. So, talk about the technology. So, what are some of the tools and the technical tools that you're using to leverage to bring that experience of both the consumer and the product to life? Because I
Mm,
do think people don't think about technology and makeup, right?
yeah.
And products and how they actually go to market. So, can you talk to us a little bit about what are the tools that you're using when you do this UX researching and design?
That's a good question. So I would say from the side of a UX researcher, we use many tools. Ever since COVID, especially, we've had to really adapt. Think about the fact that back in the day, you could be able to bring people into the office, sit them in a room, have a conversation, etc. Nowadays, or at least post 2020, that was a little bit trickier to do. So we've adapted to the landscape and had to implement things like remote testing. So that's the ability to
Okay.
basically test without actually having to physically be there or even sometimes to even run the sessions. You just have to set it up and then you will get users that are either recruited by a third party. And so that makes things easier as well in terms of finding the people you actually need to speak to. Um, Things like surveys as well. I think we use platforms usually that people have some level of awareness on. So things like Typeform, Google surveys, etc. The interface has to basically be something that people can utilize. So many different platforms, many different tools. I would say just the biggest difference since the pandemic is how much more remote testing we're doing these days versus back in the day before COVID. And I think it's actually allowed for us to have bigger opportunities to actually speak to different people across the world and not have those limitations of, okay, we're only just able to speak to the UK consumer. Now we're speaking to the US consumer. We're speaking to the
Okay.
Latin American users. We're speaking to users in Asia, etc. These are markets we want to break into. And so this remote testing really gives us the opportunity to really yeah, kind of see what the sentiment would be if we bought in a particular digital product or we had a new concept that we really wanted to work. Um, Again, it really just helps to make those data informed decisions, which I'm a big, big supporter of. Better to make data informed decisions than to almost put something to market that you then have to retract, which is, I think, what you were saying at the very end of your question there around then how do you know or when do you know to put those things to market? And I would say when you're the most informed.
Right.
um, but sometimes I do feel like even when you are informed, there has to be a stopping point. Otherwise, you risk just keeping on asking more or less the same questions. So I feel like you have to answer the questions that you would say high level, this is what we want to know, and then let's move on to the next thing because we've learned enough, but maybe this is good enough to go to market. So yeah, that's how.
Listen, so I'm not sure if we mentioned it, but Tariro is coming in from London and she works for a company based in London. And what was interesting is, you wanted to make sure that your product is not just serving the UK user, but you
Mhm.
talked about now you're expanding to Latin America, US based users. So
Mm,
you've had a background in UX design, you've had a background in, researching for the end user experience, and you've done that work over the past couple of years. But you also did some work for some Asian-based organizations. So Landcool, you were a UX researcher for a company in Tokyo,
yeah.
actually a couple of companies in Tokyo. So can you tell me about the experience for working for a London or UK-based organization versus one in Tokyo?
That's a really, really awesome way to put it. I would say it's so different.
Yeah.
But in a good way, actually. I think the advantage I had working in Tokyo was I was working in companies that were also very international, very
Okay.
multilingual. They were
Okay.
hiring a lot of people that were coming from Western countries, so places like Germany and Italy and England and the US. So in that sense, I didn't get the full Japanese experience of working in a
Okay.
Japanese company. I had friends who worked in Japanese companies, and the working culture is very different. It's very,
How
I would,
so?
yeah, very regimented.
Okay.
So you're in before everyone else, you're last to leave. It
Okay.
wasn't that, yeah. So it wasn't that way for the companies I worked at, again, because a lot of the founders were themselves, um, one was British, the other one was from Hong Kong. So it felt very much like I was still in an environment that was very familiar to me. But
Okay.
I would say once I stepped out of the office, it wasn't familiar to me. And so I
Okay.
still value the experience of learning the Japanese culture. Even if it
Ah,
wasn't in my workplace, I still had that opportunity to really learn what it's like to be in Japan and be in a different country. And yeah, again, really become accustomed, yeah, to what it's like to live there. But I
so let me just correct this. So I think I missed that. You actually were living and working in Tokyo.
yes, I was. Yep, yep.
Ah,
I was
okay.
living and working there, which I could have never predicted. So I guess if we're talking about pivoting, that's
Yes.
actually where it comes into it because
Okay.
when I graduated university, that was 2017, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I actually didn't know that I wanted to go into technology. That wasn't something that I even had on my radar. I just knew that I had a set of skills that I didn't really know what they could be applied to. And so when I came out of university, I took a job in a local authority. And for me, that was okay. That was fine. But again, it wasn't really something that I felt strongly inclined to, if that makes sense. And so when I saw the opportunity to go to Japan on a what we call in the UK, so how do I say it's a working holiday visa, which basically is yeah, and I think you have it in the US too, which
Yeah,
is
we have the
basically
same thing.
a partnership with two countries, and you can be able to travel and live there and work there. And so for me, that was the opportunity that I wanted to take to go somewhere that I've always loved, that being Japan, use the skill sets that I had, which I know were analytical based on my degree, but also my interest in design, etc. And so that's where that journey really started off.
What I love about that is so I always tell folks, especially this next generation who are coming into the workforce, is
Mm,
learn how to do work outside of where you were raised, right? So
absolutely.
you obviously were raised partly in the UK, and you basically said, hey, let me go somewhere else and figure out how to do business effectively there. And you
Mm,
spent the first part of your career
yeah.
moving from the UK, moving to Japan,
Mm,
getting that experience,
mm.
and then you pivoted back to the
Exactly.
UK.
Exactly.
So
Which
today's conversation is about pivot points and how you think through these pivots. So what was going through your mind when you said, it's time for me to pivot from UK and go to Japan? And
Mm.
then what was in your mind when you said, well, now it's time to pivot and go back?
You know what? That wasn't a choice. That wasn't a choice. That was COVID that made that choice for
Ah,
me because
okay.
all of the borders were closing. And in the UK, there was a specific time when they said, if you're not back, you're not entering until like the following year or whatever. But it was like you weren't even sure whether or not you could go back home, right? So a lot of people around me were just deciding to leave, quit their jobs and go back. And so I had to make that really tough decision to say, I cannot simply be thousands of miles away from home where and I don't know if when the next time I'll be able to go back home will be. And so that pivot wasn't a choice that I made, but I had to make it work for me. And I will say that was probably the beginning of a
Okay.
mindset where I had to say to myself, even if this is not what I wanted to happen, I love Tokyo. I had friends there. I had a life there. I could already see what my future was going to look like. But I had to change my thinking because I couldn't come back and be miserable and just
Right.
sit in that
Yeah.
and just kind of live in that kind of like, "Oh my god, that's so unfair. Why is this happening to me?" It's happening to the rest of the world. There were so many things people wanted to happen in 2020 that didn't happen. And
Right.
so I wasn't alone in that experience, but what I did know is that I had to pivot myself and my own thinking to be like, "Well, now we're in London. What are we going to do? What's the next step? We need to move on." And so, that's really effectively what I had to do.
So tell me, give me two or three of those transferable skills that you said, okay, I'm leaving Japan. I've
Mm,
got some UX design, some creative experience, I'm analytical. Then
yes.
you had to think about how do I apply that? And tech opened up the doors for you. So,
Yeah.
what were some of the transferable skills that you felt helped you with your career pivot?
That is yeah, I love that. Transferable skills. You know what? I'm gonna focus in on the soft skills.
Okay, that's fine.
I need to get a bad rep, but like people are like, oh, well, soft skills wise, I think it was building up adaptability in my mind, right? Again, I'm going into a landscape back in London. I don't know what the job market looks like. I don't know what anything looks like in terms of what's the next move, what's the next step. So I really had to be quite adaptable, I feel, in my mind. I came from a background of very different companies that I was working for. So I think keeping an open mind around, okay, I just want an opportunity that really suits my needs and in terms of what am I interested in, but at the same time, what is also out there and what can I do in that space, et cetera, et cetera. So that was one thing, being adaptable, being flexible. The second thing was to be curious, which I think goes with the first one, is just being curious. Again, what is out there? What can I do? But I feel like if I'm curious enough, the right opportunity will also find me as well. I do not have to strain and push myself to feel like I'm just kind of going to accept something that doesn't really resonate with me. But the curiosity will lead to many doors, I feel like, opening that I wouldn't have expected. And the third thing is just to be patient. I think, again, in an environment like that where you're waiting for something to happen, patience is very difficult to embrace. But
Right.
again, once you get into the job itself, again, you have to also be patient and pace yourself too, because you're in a new environment, things are different. Maybe you've come from a different place like myself. And so you also need to just kind of relearn how to adjust. So that patience is definitely needed. So I would say, yeah, that adaptability. Um, what was the second one that I actually ended up
So I
saying?
heard this is the what I heard. This is some good point.
Yeah.
Adaptability, positive mindset.
Yes.
Learn how to be super flexible.
Yeah.
Be curious, be patient, and
Yes.
pace yourself. Those are some
Absolutely.
great golden nuggets.
Big
So
three.
let's no great golden nuggets.
Three.
So now let's talk about. So you've been at Charlotte Tilbury for a couple of years now,
I have, yeah.
and what I love about it is you've got such a beautiful energy,
Oh,
and you've put together those wonderful soft skills. You now have the technology piece of it. So there's a creative piece of it with you, creative mind thinking, and your ability to then put that business piece. But now you leverage technologies like what do we have here? Confluence, you've got user analytics, got usability, Optimizely, Adobe Omniture,
yeah.
uh, user testing documents,
Yeah.
Typeform, blah, 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 blah. So you've now leveraged those technologies and you've blended all that together in what's been a fruitful career at Charlotte Tilbury in this UX research and design space.
Yeah.
But as you think about the next, I would say 10 years, let's just say the next 5 years,
Yeah.
what kind of pivots in your mind are you thinking as you mature your career? Because, and the reason why I ask this is I
Mm,
try to tell, especially our young folks in tech, the path
mm,
is not always going to be straight. It can
absolutely
be
not.
curvy, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But just be thoughtful in the pivots that you are making. So,
Mm,
what are you thinking about in terms of pivots for you now?
yes. So for me, it's been 3 years at Charlotte Tilbury. I would say that is actually, I feel, the average time at this point for people probably in my generation to think about, okay, what's the next step? And so I have been thinking so strongly about that question around what do the next 5 years look like? What do the next 10 years? I know you said that, but I already am like 10, 20, 30, and I'm having these conversations with my future self to be like, what do I want to feel like? And also, what do I want to be visually in those next 5 years? And I think I've earned the skills to do the job. Now I'm ready for the strategic positions. Now I'm ready for the leadership positions. And I think for me in the next 5 years, it's really going to be honing in that leadership piece. I do feel like, from my experience over the years, people have made great managers, but I've seen very few leaders. And so for me, it's so critical that I am ready to be a leader, but also that I learn how to be a leader. And that's why, it was so important for me to have this relationship with you and approach you last year, because I knew that this year was going to be the year that I would begin that leadership journey. And I don't know how and I don't know why, but I strongly believe that. And I was like, I need someone that knows the journey, that knows the path. And I agree with you. It's not going to be the same exact
Right.
one for one, like for like. This is exactly the same thing. But I feel like when you see great leaders, there are characteristics, there are things that they would do, regardless of the environment, regardless of the role, that you do appreciate. And then you say, I kind of want some of that. I want to do it in my way, but I really want to learn from that. And so for me, that's where the next 5 years look like, is getting into a lead role, a head of role, hopefully in the next 5 years, and I know this is kind of pushing it, Fern, but I mean, can we get to director in 5 years? We're kind of almost there. So, I mean, that would be huge. That would definitely be an amazing, I think, goal and feat to reach within 5 years. But more than just the title, I want to be a great leader in 5 years. That is honestly, that's the one thing I want people to take away from working with me over the next couple of years is wow, she was a great leader and I had her in my company and I felt so grateful for
So
her.
I love that because that's super focused. And
Mm,
I think that's important when you're trying to get somewhere. As you
mm,
said, I want to be a really great leader in the next 5 years.
yeah.
So you've made it time bound.
Mm,
And so the only thing I would say is, think about, is it a people leader or is it just a leader across the board? Because people
mm,
can be very effective strategists. They
mm,
can be very objective, very good at developing strategy, leading strategy, selling it in,
mm,
sales leader. And you can also be a very effective people leader. So just think about the different types of leaders.
yeah.
You hear some people, what I love is I love being a leader of leaders. And
Yes.
so having run large organizations,
Yeah.
having people who understand their scope and their remit,
Yeah.
and then they can drive their organization and you help them with that strategy. So that's
Mm,
for me, my jam is leading leaders. So as you think about yourself and diving into leadership, think about, do I want to be a people leader, effective strategist? Do I want to just be an overall good leader? Because there
mm,
are ways that you can break it down and get more granular. But I love that you've already thought it through and given yourself a little bit of a time frame in which that you want to achieve this. So,
yeah.
hey, I know this is where the conversation goes. The conversations can ebb and flow as well. So we don't
Pivot
need,
in itself, some might
we're not pivot. So let me share a few gems of things that successful leaders do differently.
Yeah.
And as people are thinking about these pivots, you really think about having smart goals. So you just nailed it. You just nailed it. You talked about what? I want
Mm,
to be a really good, effective leader in what? 5 years, right?
yeah.
Very cool. 5 years, make that happen.
Yeah.
You make decisions and you take action. And I
Mm,
think that you took some of that action with say, hey, I'd like to get a mentor like Fern. Hey, I'd like to look at furthering my education. Some of the things we talked about is potentially going after a master's.
yeah.
Hey, I want to look at opportunities that allow me to develop people.
Mm,
So I think you're looking at ways that you could take action. And that's what really helps you also be effective is knowing that you've got to, one, be focused on, one, have a goal, which you have.
mm,
Two, take action and make a decision, take a decision. And then, really focus on being productive and not busy. So I think I'm gonna stop at those three gems. Goals,
yeah.
focus, don't just be busy, but be productive
Mm,
and take decisions and take action. And so I
mm,
think as you think about leadership and where you want to go, I'd invite you to blend those into your thinking process. All right, this is
yeah.
not a mentoring session because, girl, you're already there. You're on your way. What other pivots are you thinking about taking in your life in the next couple of years? Anything
Yeah.
else?
Yes, I think for me, you know what, I can get a little personal with it. I think also just being a woman in general, and I don't know how much this will apply to different people who are listening on this, but I think also it's important, I think, for me to also consider family as a part of my own pivot, because for those women who do want to have children, that's not a choice by every woman, but for those who do, I would say this is something I'm consciously also having to think about is in the next 5 years, wanting to achieve these really awesome goals for myself. There is also part of me that's thinking, okay, then where does family building kind of factor into that? What does that look like? And because there is also another part of me as well, Fern, that's like, I've got one more travel in me. I've got one more, I could
Okay.
live somewhere else and work somewhere else.
So you're
Yeah.
fairly young. We will talk numbers, but I think you have more than one more. But I think you're saying you have the aspiration to pivot again away from the UK and potentially live abroad.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the reason why I say maybe one more is maybe like a before and after effect. Like,
Wow.
okay, before you have any other commitment, like a kid that you have to think about, oh, their schooling, where their place, I do want to consider that, and not be naive to the fact that that's something I will have to consciously also think about and factor in. So before that, I would love, the opportunity to spend a couple of years somewhere else, my partner and I working in another country and having that opportunity because why not? But also I think it could also bring its own opportunities. Tokyo did. So I'm like, where else can we go? What else can we bring? What kind of adventure could that also result in? So yeah, I would say definitely that. And also, like I said, living elsewhere could potentially be another pivot that I'm taking again. Let's see how that one goes. Hopefully won't end in a pandemic. So fingers crossed that it will be more my choice when I then decide to come back to the UK. As I always feel this will always be my base.
That's interesting. I always felt the U.S. would be my base.
Oh.
I had a number of career pivots as I went from an individual contributor to
Mm,
a people manager to an executive to a senior executive in my organization. And my
mm,
thinking had to change. And I'm telling you, when you make career pivots, they can really have a profound impact in how you lead. I
mm.
would say both positively and negatively. I
Wow.
mean, there's shifts that help you identify who you are.
Yeah.
There are shifts that will help you grow and reinvent yourself. There are
Yeah.
shifts that will expand your influence
Yeah.
and aperture for learning and your aperture for knowledge
Yeah.
and your aperture for just understanding culture and how to
Absolutely.
work and navigate in different. So I think taking these career pivots are important. What I think is also important to share for our audience who's listening is think through and develop
Yeah.
a plan.
Mm,
And all the plans don't have to go exactly as you're thinking they are. But if you really be thoughtful with, okay, where do I want to be in the next 5 years? Or you can operate with the end in mind. What do I want to say at the end of a 30-year career? What do I want to be known for? What do I
yeah.
want to say I've accomplished? And then work
Mm,
backwards to then put some milestones to check off to say, hey, do I
mm.
want to be known for being the top researcher across all of the world, UX
Yeah.
researcher? I don't know if that maybe is your aspiration. Do you want to be the top CMO somewhere or CIO
Mm,
or CTO? Or do you want to
mm.
run your own business? So I think as you're thinking about your pivots along your career, it's important to think about it, plan it, and map it out
Yeah.
because there will be pivots you have to take, planned or unplanned.
Yeah.
If you have a plan, it does help because then
Yeah.
you could also say to yourself, how am I tracking against this? Am I
Mm.
off plan? Am I taking a role that doesn't hit my end state goals?
Yes, yes. And actually, you know what? That is such a good point around having a North Star. I kind of took that from
Well, North Star, I
I
love it.
want a North Star. It's been a guiding light. And I couldn't agree with you more that it is just needed just to keep you on track. Because I would say, in my next role, for me, there are definitely things that I would want, things that I'm looking for that I'm like, you know what? I can't really move until I see that come to fruition. And so, with that guiding light, I'm able to leave only when the opportunity is really what I have in mind. And I think sometimes when you are frustrated and you're in an area or a time of things not working out, things not really being the way that you would have wanted them, you're so eager to jump. But sometimes you jump into something that's really not for you. And so those pivots that you're speaking about, sometimes when they are negative, I do feel at times the reason that sometimes happening is because it's not really aligning with actually what you would have wanted. And so taking that time to just take a step back and be like, is this really part of the plan? Is this really my North Star? Is this really going to lead to that end goal? I think asking your questions, even when it's really tough, and trust me, I know that I feel that when you're in that desert, some people might say, what is it, the valley? When you're in the valley,
Right, right, right.
sometimes it's very difficult to see beyond your current situation. And so I do feel, even if it's hard, you have to take that step back to say, is this really what I want as my next move? Is this the right opportunity for me? Because you don't want to be going into the fire, into the frying pan, and then the situation's just the same in a different environment. Because that could also just really, I think, deplete your sense of hope in the next move and in the next thing. So, really essential, I think, when you are making those pivots, like you said, to really consider, is this aligning? And when it's not. Everybody has that gut feeling. They do. Some people just ignore it and some people listen to it. But I think it's really crucial to really say, again, is this an alignment for me? And is this what I really and truly want? So yeah.
Love, love, love it. So, do you have a group of people, or maybe your circle of friends, or mentors, or sponsors, or your network, or your circle, that when you're thinking about these career pivots, that you
Mm,
bounce those off on? Who's your network that you tap into
yeah.
to make sure you're heading in the right direction?
My mom.
Okay.
Number one person, she is the director of a local authority in the UK. She has had a 30 plus year career being a leader. So if we go back to what it is that I aspire to be, I would say that is the one person I bounce anything off before I go to any other council. And don't get me wrong, I have many different opportunities to speak to many different mentors, yourself included. But for me, that is the first person I ever saw be a leader, be a woman who was empowered at work in her career, and really knowing how to actually also still be a mom. Like, and I think for me, you get media portrayals of women who are very successful, and then you get like the real life thing where you actually see that these women are also human and they're all awesome in their own different ways. So for me, I would say that is the first person I go to just based on her own resume alone. I have a lot of respect for my mom. And so this is the person, yeah, I'm always going to, and I'm like, Mom, like this is the opportunity I got. Like, what do you think? And we talk about it. And I've done that, man, since I was like, gosh, 11, like this is, Mom,
Okay.
what, like I'm taking this course, I'm taking this subject. Like, what do you think about this subject, Mom? Like, da da da. Like, I'm going to go do this degree. When I decided I was going to go to Tokyo, the one person I would say honestly just said to me, do what you think is right. And, if
Right.
that's the decision you want to make, make it. And that was my mom. And I really, really appreciate that. So yeah.
So here's what I heard. I mean, so shout out to your mom. What's your mom's name? I'm
Flora,
sorry. I'm sorry.
Flora, like the flower.
Oh, Laura.
Flora.
Okay. Okay. So, Laura, we're giving you a shout out. You are a mom extraordinaire. You are an empowered woman with, I think you've got grit, grace, and gratitude. So, shout out to all that, what your mom has poured into you, and knowing that she is your North Star to make sure that she keeps you grounded, you
Mm.
align with your gut, and align with your vision and where you want to go. So, no one knows you better than your mama. So, or your mom. Do you call your
We
mom mom or mom?
we called her mum.
Mom? Okay, so no one knows you better than your mom. So, great. So, all right, we're going to wrap this conversation up. We're making sure in all these discussions that we're giving it back and paying it forward. So,
Absolutely.
you are, I would say, what, 5, 6 years into your career?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
6 almost 6 plus. We're almost
6
getting
plus.
in.
Okay, so not 10 yet, but between 7 and 10 years in your career.
Yeah.
What would you want to say to your future self?
Oh. Which age? Because I got a conversation for every decade.
Oh, okay. All
I
right.
know.
So, all right. So let's just say I think you're heading into your 30s. So let's talk about what you're saying to yourself in the 30s.
Oh, what an achievement. What an achievement you have done. In my 30s, she's achieving a lot. I
Okay.
think 20s, she was laying the groundwork. I think that was the decade of
Okay.
really putting those foundations.
Foundation.
Yeah, exactly. Really just putting in that work. 30s, I think, is reaping the rewards of all of those lessons and those learnings and really applying them. And I think in a very strategic way,
Yep.
in a very, again, my job is to be data informed. I'm informing myself what I've learned and applying it into what I now need to do to move to the next step. So I feel like, yeah, 30s, she's a badass. I don't know if I can say that, but she is. I think
Absolutely.
she's an accomplished, achieved, woman and definitely very self-assured, super, but also
Okay.
very kind and very compassionate. And I really, really can't wait to meet her in that decade. So yeah.
So now what's the 40th decade?
Oh, oh,
You can't even think about that, girl. I'm
I can't
beyond
even
that.
think
So
about the level of success of the 40s. I can't even think about the level. But, my greatest joy, I feel like in my 40s, 50s, no matter where I go beyond the 30s, is bringing my mentors along with me. I think that will be really crucial to, I think, see the seed that you have all planted within me, especially Fern, to see, I think, all the work we would have done over the years and really just, take a look back and appreciate it as well. So maybe my 40s will be that reflective success time. We succeeded, but now we are really reflecting on what that really means and what we can do for the next generation. And, hopefully you still being a part of it and how we can both work to impact the next generation. So yeah, I got to make way. I got to move to the side. I got to rest.
Well, make a ton of money and you can rest early. How about that one?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right? I'm learning from the youth. That's you say, yeah, okay, yeah. There you go. Well, it's been wonderful to have this conversation with you, Tariro. I just think you're a beacon of light and love your energy. Love how focused you are. I'm hoping that other budding leaders in tech can see that you too can be here and you too can learn from an old fart like me.
Oh, no.
And chart your path. And let's just leave folks with a couple of helpful hits. And because we talked about a lot today. So here's what we want to leave people with.
Yeah.
When you're taking your pivots, make sure you're what? Adaptable.
Yes.
Make sure you're what? Positive.
There you go.
Flexible.
Come on. Yeah.
Curious. Be patient. Also pace yourself. Also talked about when you're making your career pivots, have a North Star. Have a guiding light to help keep you on track. But I'll add to that, plan, but able to be flexible because the plans are going to sometimes change.
Absolutely.
You talked about when you're making your career pivots, you got to see beyond the current situation. Is this aligning to me? Make sure you don't deplete your sense of hope and your sense of purpose. And then I always talk about, you said go with your gut and trust your gut. I talk about think with your head, feel with your heart, and then go with your gut.
Oh, I love that.
That never fails you. And then we want to give props to Mom and all that she's poured into you and being your North Star and your circle network or your tight network. She's the top of your board of directors, helping you to make decisions. And then because we're thoughtful about this, we want to make sure that, as you look at the decades, you've got your learning and your earning years, you've got reaping the seeds that you've sown, and then you've got your reflective success time. And hopefully you're bringing the next generation forward and helping the work that they're doing. So you are a super self-assured and kind and generous and compassionate leader in tech. And we're so happy that you were here with us on this edition of You're My Too Lit Chick. You're my other lit chick for this session. Woo, 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 woo. Hey, friends, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to Tariro, hailing in from London, UK. It is probably like 7 o'clock at night on a Friday night, but she's still eye-open, ready to have her libation and spend some time with her boo bear and have a great weekend. Hey guys, there's more to come. We have another great episode of Two Lit Chicks coming your way. But for this session, all about career pivot points. We hope you learned a few things. Listen, like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the other side.